This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Find out how simple and affordable it is to get your model railroad product or service in front of our growing and amazingly engaged audience. Email us at aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the art of the review. And joining me to do that, Ryan Crawford. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here, Ryan. The way we connected, it was regarding or wrapped around ATLP 2022 and the interchange tour. And Matt Fricks brought the car to you. And then not too long after, I got this envelope in the mail. And with a hefty bill associated with it, and I think your handwriting was on it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, when Matt brought the car, the first thing I thought of when we put it on the layout to take some pictures of it was me modeling the Chicago and Illinois Midland, which is a short line coal hauler in central Illinois. One of their big keys to success throughout the 70s and 80s was foreign car repair. And so AAR billing was like a big deal for them. And I just so happened to have the exact copies of the AAR billing statement. And then, of course, I made up a fake letter and mailed it your way. And that's what you ended up with in the mail. Now, I'll tell you the truth. I had no idea how much a wheel and axle assembly was. And even though my dad worked for the CNIM and worked in the wheel shop for a few years, he couldn't remember either. So I just threw a number on there, so I don't really know.
I had a couple zeros at the end of it. I do remember that, and I quickly drafted up a reply and basically told you that the statute of limitations had pretty much run out on any claims. Plus, the car should have been under warranty during that time period, and the fact that it was sent prior to the car even being built in era time. I called it out, and but boy, that was a lot of fun. And boy, I was just tickled. You did such a nice job. I mean, all the paperwork's filled out. I still have it. I kept everything in a drawer. That was just quite a memory of the ATLP 2022 car hitting your layout, and you had a lot of fun with it. So that's the idea of it.
What's great is when you sent back your reply, you also threw some stickers in there, and I put the ATLP sticker right on my layout, right above the area where I have kind of the brains of the system, you know? So every time I walk over there, turn the layout on, there's the ATLP sticker.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. So we met through that, and then, we started talking, and I know that you do reviews for Model Railroad News when our good friend Tony Cook, and was thinking of this topic idea. I've done only one review, and boy, I had to do a lot of borrowing from other reviews, going through reading Model Railroad News and all the copies I had, and kind of figuring out like, what are the things to look for? And I said, boy, this is kind of like its own thing, like understanding what to look for in a review. So I wanted to bring a reviewer on, and no better guy than you to talk to and get to know a little bit more, and then talk about the process and how you got into reviewing, and then what you put into a review for MRN or anywhere else where you review.
Yeah, it was absolutely by accident. I had co-authored a book on the Chicago and Illinois Midland back in 2009, and Tony's dad, Terry, actually contributed a lot of photographs because we live fairly close to one another, because Tony grew up in Jerseyville, Illinois, and just kind of met Tony through Terry at a GM&O meet convention, I think, back in about 2015. And me and Tony got to talking, and I think he had just recently come on board with White River Productions. And I mean, he he kind of spun that magazine around, because I think originally when Model Railroad News was being published, I think it was more of a flyer.
Oh, wow.
And he turned it into a full-fledged magazine. And I could tell you that we try very hard to give the reader and the potential customer of these locomotives, freight cars, model, all this model stuff coming out, a good idea of not only the prototype, how many were there, how heavy are they, how powerful are they, blah, 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 but, also the cost. And it was just weird how it all worked out. And that was in 2016 when I did my first review.
Do you remember your first review? What it was that you reviewed?
I believe it was a Walthers C&W SD7 that they had done, that was a former Minneapolis and St. Louis SD7. I think it was number 301. And when I started that review, I was scared to death. I was like, man, what am I going to say? I mean, what do we do here? So what I did was, just like you said 2 minutes ago, you got to go and read some good reviews of other models, freight cars, locomotives, whatever it may be, doesn't matter what scale, and, get an idea of, okay, let's hit the high points here. And, as we get along further in this interview and I get more detailed about what I'm looking for, it'll become apparent how I do it. So I don't know if you want to know that right now, but there is a process that I go through.
Well, we'll talk about learning to write reviews. I mean, first, you mentioned meeting Tony through his dad, but what was even the start, the idea of, okay, I can even do this. I can write a review on this. I mean, did you feel like opinionated on product? Did you feel like that need to share that information? What really sparked up your desire to even write reviews for model railroad products?
Well, the love of diesel locomotives. I mean, my dad was a diesel shop machinist for 22 years. I'd been around locomotives my entire life. My earliest memory of a diesel locomotive was climbing onto a switch engine in Springfield and falling off. And I know that sounds terrible, but that's something I'll never forget. I was 3 years old.
I bet.
And ever since then, I have understood brake shoes, trucks, wheel diameter, engine size, exhaust, to understand how an EMD, for example, works. And then as I got older, I started learning more about GEs. So a lot of those details that I talk about come naturally to me, where they would not come naturally to someone else because they weren't around it.
Yeah, super detail-oriented person, aren't you?
Very, yes.
Does that carry over to your modeling too? I mean, you were super detailed in a bill you sent to me, so I can only imagine that your modeling is that way too.
Yeah, one of the things that always comes up on these new models that are coming out, people sometimes get a little fired up over the price. And I'm going to tell you right now, I mean, if I can go out and buy a locomotive with a decoder detailed to the hilt with every nut and bolt, and with a sound decoder for $330, I'm telling you right now, for one of my SD38-2s, I know I've got 60 hours in each one of them.
Well, that's what it is. It's kind of, in that thought, time is money, right? So, if you have all that time in the world where you want to do it yourself, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But there is a value to it.
Right. I don't ever want to build another CNIM SD38-2. I know that because I've done 6 of them. So, but yeah, there's, just you were asking me also about, writing the review. That comes fairly easy because when I co-authored that CNIM book, I really learned how to capture the details of the photographs that were in the book. And, just kind of a practice makes perfect, I guess. Just kept practicing at it. And, it just kind of was natural to sit down and tell everybody about a Chicago Northwestern SD7.
I always kind of wonder about that when you know that you have a book in you. We'll kind of sidetrack a little bit and talk about your book that you wrote. When do you know that you have a book inside you, that there's something that, is to be told, and you have that, ability and enough deep knowledge to say, okay, I can put this all together in writing?
Well, for me personally, that was probably when I was about 20 years old. And the saddest part of the whole thing is I knew a lot when I was 20. I'm 50 now. I've learned so much since that book came out. And that's what's crazy is like, I want to write another one about the CNIM because I know 50% more than I did 30 years ago, you know? But yeah, there was a time opportunity presented itself, and I had a friend that was already writing books working with Bobby Hennessy at Morning Sun, and it just, that kind of fell into place too. And it was time. 2009, we had it published, and, you know, again, though, there were so many things that I learned after that.
I guess maybe because I'm fascinated about the entire writing process, and you know, I imagine just so much. I've written, you know, very little. I've done, you know, letter writing, and yeah, I did submit a couple articles. One's been in RMC, and then you know, I've did that one review for Model Railroad News, and then I wrote an editorial. So I've written really short format, but long format's got to be quite a challenge and quite a time take too.
Yes, it takes a lot of time. Back when we did that book in 2009, I mean, that was a lesson in not only research, but I mean, there was no digital archiving. There was no scanning then. I didn't have that capability. So you had to collect the color slides and send them to the publisher, you know?
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore. And you save so much time. I can sit right in my own office and get half of the work of a book completed with just the tools on my desk. That's what's crazy.
Yeah, it's the advance of things makes it certainly a lot. I imagine 10 times easier, and I can only imagine what it was like even before that. You know, without technology and putting all this together and sending that information in, it must have been quite a challenge. Do you recall how many hours you spent putting that book together?
That book was that took about 2 years to finish. I mean, boy, pinpointing hours is tough on that.
Well, 2 years. I mean, yeah, there's enough hours right there. Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, I would say if I were to have to put a number on it, you know, a couple 100 hours probably. But that's travel time, interview time, you know, having people come to the house to interview them, driving to interview other people, you know, getting to know new employees that I didn't know from the CNIM throughout all those years. And yeah, it's just, it takes a lot of time, a lot of dedication. And I tell you, when you write a book, you're doing it. It's like you're doing it for the love of the railroad. You're doing it because you want to share the information.
Yeah, that's a term that just came to my mind when you were talking about this labor of love, and boy, a lot of reward to be able to use it as an opportunity to meet a whole bunch of new people and be able to really dive in and get that really cool inside baseball stuff, you know, that you get to learn by talking to these folks.
Yes. And it's kind of a twofold thing for me, because not only did I get to learn more about the operations of the CNIM Railway, I modeled the CNIM Railway. So it was just, that helped me understand what was going on. And I tell people this all the time and they laugh, but it's true. If I didn't have a specific era that I modeled, I'd probably have a bedroom full of freight cars that would never come out of the box because I like trains. So this kind of, I have a harness on me now. So if it doesn't fit the era of the layout, I don't buy it. So kind of lucky in that regard.
Yeah, the good old Matt Frick's saying about guardrails, right? Sets you up some really nice guardrails.
Yeah, it does. It does. And Matt should know, because I mean, he is even as specific as, you know, down to the month, you know, May of 95 or June of 95, whatever month he's modeling. But yeah, he got really specific.
So how detail orientated can you stay in your modeling as you're modeling the CNIM? Because you know so much. Is that kind of like a double-edged sword? Like, because it's almost like you can't slip back to ignorant bliss as you're modeling.
Yeah, it's gotten worse. I like you can't, like I can't just pick up a sheet of decals anymore and go, oh, these will work. I just had new ones made because I couldn't handle it.
Blessing and the curse of knowing all this knowledge, right?
It is. And then it's funny, like I was complaining about building 6 SD38-2s, and I've got them all 70 through 75. But the last one, I just Cato, for some reason, when they made the HO scale SD38-2, they made the fuel tank. Those actually had the shorter fuel tanks, kind of like a Milwaukee SD40-2. And the fuel tank on them, the fuel tanks on the CNIM units were 17 feet long. Well, the HO model is 18 feet. So guess what I did? Spent 5 hours hacking up the fuel tank and making it the right length. And I should have done it to all of them, but I didn't even know it in the first 3 I built. So, it's just one of those things.
And speaking of, we won't pick on any particular model railroad manufacturer, but mistakes are made as products are being produced, and maybe some things missed in the production process or design process. It must be a tricky balance, because I would think that this being a fun hobby, you really don't want to have a full out on bash review of a product. It must be tough and really kind of an art form to balance and walk that line a little bit, isn't it?
Yes, you're exactly right. I'm going to be honest with you right now. I hope 5 billion people are listening to this. I love model trains, and there are people out there that are not rivet counters. And I just feel like my job is to maybe point out something that's obviously incorrect and tell them how to fix it. Sometimes you can fix it with a little paint. Sometimes you can fix it with decals. I wouldn't go into a 9-step process in my review on how to shorten a Cato fuel tank, but I may mention it just because it's part of the review, but never, ever would I bash never. And I never have. And I always tell Tony all the time, I'm very careful about treating all of the manufacturers with respect, because Ray, it's thousands of dollars to tool up an HO scale locomotive or a freight car. I mean, it's thousands of dollars. So, you gotta be careful.
I kind of knew that, but I'll tell you, when TSG Multimedia, John over there, just put out a new video where he did a tour of micro trains, and they walked him through, and he did an awesome job, by the way. And I'll share the link to the video on our episode page here, but did such an awesome job walking through. And I was just utterly amazed, like just the steps it takes just to produce stuff. And, from design to packaging to the car itself and all the details and assembly and on and on and on. It's not snap your fingers magic. It is a whole load of work that has to be done, and a whole lot of risk too. I mean, you put these cars or locomotives or whatever you're producing out, and then you hope the public buys them. There's a whole bunch of investment behind that.
There is, totally. And, some people get excited, negatively excited, when a manufacturer will put a fake paint scheme on a freight car, but they're just trying to appeal to a mass audience. They might do 5 schemes that are absolutely prototypical and then add 2 schemes that aren't. But I get it. I would probably do the same thing. I'd try to get my money out of my tooling, to sell more units. That's the way that's the business model.
Yeah, for sure. That's the thing I think we kind of forget. It is a hobby, but it is a business. It is one where they need to turn a profit to exist. And sometimes we don't need to know all the things. I kind of say that, it's kind of two-sided. Like, we don't need to know every single thing. Like, at a restaurant, I don't need to know how many times my steak hit the floor spice, nor do I need to know that, the restaurant's having a fight with the farmer that supplies their beef. I just need to know my steak comes out medium well, topped with onions and mushrooms and a cold beverage on the side, and I enjoy it. And I kind of feel the same way with the model railroad product, although it is interesting to see the kind of how it's made and how it's done, and you learn a little inside baseball, because I think we're all at that little bit of detail orientated thing going on. But in the end, we just need to know that it's good. And that's where you guys doing reviews come in.
Right. Our job is to tell people, explain to people what they're buying, what they're looking at, and what this specific item has to offer. So, I mean, that's part of the job.
So let's talk a little bit about the process of the review and the things that you go through, and we'll throw a couple categories out here to you. And well, let's start with, I think maybe the favorite, right? Locomotives. So when you get a sample in hand from manufacturer X, what are some of the things that you start to initially look at?
First things I look at are packaging. And what's very important to me is when I open the package and I get the model out of its plastic cradle or whatever it's in, is it all still in one piece? And I mean, it does happen where we are getting to the point now where models are so highly detailed. And I mean, we're talking finite details that you really, really have to be careful with them when you open them. I mean, it's crazy. I've even said in my reviews several times. In fact, people probably get sick of reading this, but I always tell people when you handle a locomotive, handle it with your index finger, middle finger, and thumb and pick it up by the fuel tank. Don't ever pick it up by the cab or the trucks or the car body, because you're talking, you got ABS handrails that can bend. You've got fuel tank details fore and aft that can break. You got antennas, horns. So yeah, I'd throw that in there because I think it's important for people to know how to handle the stuff.
Yeah, that's for sure. I have to discipline myself. I'm one of those guys, kind of, sausage fingers and the soft, delicate touch of 80 grit sandpaper at times, where I've got to really slow myself down. Like, even, rolling stock, flipping it over, changing wheel sets, like Ray, slow down. You see that stirrup right there? You want that stirrup to stay on the car. So slow down and avoid it. Like, be completely aware and make sure that you don't break it.
Right.
And sometimes I'm 3 out of 4 on that, but it's like in back holding the stirrup there with a little bit of CA trying to put the stirrup back on. But yeah, it's definitely that way that you have to be super careful with these things. And the packaging is so important now. I mean, we're talking about, I don't know. I just get this vision of Jim Carrey from Ace Ventura kicking the package down the hallway. And, these things have got to survive the rough shipping conditions, coming overseas in a container and then, making it across the country. And then of course, delivery right to the final mile it can be a rough thing. So packaging is so important.
Yeah. And that reminds me that absolutely is one of my favorite movies. And when he's kicking that package, he's like, I got a package, people. Remember that? So,
yep.
Anyway, but yeah, no, you have to. And I think that's important for me to point out, it's like, a lot of times there will be specific maintenance requirements that come with the locomotive. And those maintenance requirements sometimes involve, removing the shell, adding a little bit of lube oil to the bearings, things like that. And I always stress to read they come with these great manuals now, that walk you through pretty much anything you need to know. And with everybody having a website, even if there's an issue, go right to the website, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to get your answer about how to fix a problem, or, hey, I broke off a lift ring or something. And, a lot of times they'll just send you one. So there's a lot of camaraderie out there still in the business world.
So once we get this locomotive out of the package, what's the next thing you're looking at?
Okay. What I'll do is just kind of give it a once over. And if it's a locomotive that I know a lot about, like let's say an SD40-2, I start looking at specific details that make it an SD40-2. I'll look at the long hood. I'll look at the dynamic brake grid. I'll look at the tooling of the doors on the hood. I'll look at, does this have a silencer exhaust? Does it have a regular exhaust? What kind of details are on top of the cab? Does it have a beacon? I'm kind of finicky about the cab glasses installed. How straight is it? Is it clean? Does it have fingerprints on it? Is there glue oozing out? A lot of times now with these new models, they all have wire grab irons. I make sure those are straight and solid. And then I just kind of keep working down, and I'll go to the handrails and I'll see how straight they are. Then I get to the trucks and the fuel tank, and some of these manufacturers are just getting absolutely crazy with these details under the frame. I mean, we're talking we're talking speed recorder cables. We're talking the right like bearing covers. We're talking, the right struts on an SD40-2 in the middle axle of the truck. It's just, so yeah, there's a lot to take in. And then as I'm writing, I try to go in that order, just to kind of keep everything kind of try to make it as simple as I can. Then I get into the paint, because obviously paint and markings, decals, first things you're going to see. Does this specific locomotive have a builder plate? Does it have the FRA required F on the front of the frame to denote the front of the locomotive? Does it have the right type of snow plow? Does it have, what kind of couplers is it equipped with? Is it a coupler like, I know Scale Trains kind of has their own metal coupler. Some manufacturers have McHenry couplers. Some have, I'm not sure if there's any manufacturers of HO diesels that use KDs, but sometimes they're close to a KD, a spring knuckle coupler. So yeah, those kind of things.
This information that you're using to compare the model, is this from carnal knowledge, or is there some kind of background research that's going into this? Like you mentioned, specific details on the SD40. So when you're getting one, is there an amount of research you're doing beforehand for it?
Absolutely. And then I'm just going to full disclosure here. I have a lot of Diesel Era magazines. Diesel Era was absolutely one of the best resources for this type of work. I mean, they talked about, when I used to read Diesel Era in the 90s, I'm like, why in the world would I need to know if there's a stiffening rib on a non-dynamic hatch, And then now I'm looking at these models and all of a sudden I'm seeing a stiffening rib on these non-dynamic hatches. But because I read that and understood why it was there and what it was, all that now is like, it's falling into place and making sense. And that is the number one tool I use. I mean, if you like diesels, I would just go get a loan and buy all the back issues from Diesel Era. I mean, they are awesome. I love Diesel Era. I wish I could have met those guys when they were actually writing Diesel Era, because their knowledge was just, I mean, I think I know a lot about diesels. I don't know nothing compared to these guys. It's incredible and still is.
It's almost as if they knew, right? Like they knew that somebody's going to eventually come out with highly detailed locomotives where this information is going to be crucial.
Right. And I mean, like I said, back in the 90s, I'm reading like, why do I care if a Conrail GE-840C has, these type of like grab irons on the nose? Well, that was stuff they pointed out, 30 years ago. And here I am researching it right now. And it's just, yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I'm glad you asked me that question, because whenever somebody asks me like, what's your resource material? And I'm telling you, 97% of what, if I don't know it, 97% of that research comes from Diesel Era, because they just covered things so specifically. They're awesome.
What would you say is the most important aspect of a model locomotive to look at? Is there like a number one thing that you look at for a review and say it's gotta hit this mark?
Yeah. One of the things that I look for, and a lot of people don't really talk about this too much, I am a stickler for clean looking number boards. I've seen like where friends of mine, not going to mention any names, have painted a locomotive and done a wonderful job, and then the number boards look all sloppy. That drives me nuts. And I mean, I will spend 25 minutes on a number board to make sure the numbers are straight. It's the decal. I'm just that way with number boards. You can take an Athearn Blue Box engine and make it look 100 times better by just doing a good job on the number boards, honestly.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's seemingly, like you said, not to pick on anybody, but it's seemingly a part that people do skip or skimp on. It's like I've seen like beautifully painted locomotives and you look at the ends and there's no number boards on it. It's like, did you give up? And it's like, I know it's challenging. It's got to be a little bit of a challenge, and you got to be set up right for it. You got to have an opto visor, or you got to have a the ability to see it. It's challenging that way. And if you've got to create numbers and try to do it one number at a time, I'm sure that's super challenging.
Right.
But it finishes it. It gives it that finished look, right?
Absolutely. I think, and the manufacturers are actually getting so detailed with the number boards now that even the numerals are starting to be the right size. Sometimes, you'll get like an engine, like I'm trying to bring up a good example, where like sometimes the number boards will look like the 4 numbers are crammed in there. Well, they really were. And so to make it look right, you want them crammed in there. So yeah, and it's not easy to do. I've done it a zillion times. I use a straight edge razor blade and an optivisor, and I do them one digit at a time. And man, it's a pain, but the results are worth it. The results are worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Reward to that time is results, right? Taking your time and going slow. And it's just, it's an exercise in patience.
Right.
So let's talk about rolling stock. Does the process differ? I mean, obviously we've got totally different parts here, locomotive to say a box car or a tank car, but does the process change, or is there something, obviously other things to look at, but what's the process there?
Same idea, not as many details, of course. You're still going to look at, the paint. You're going to look at the numbers, the fonts of the numbers, the placement of the numbers, and the insignia. Let me use an easy example for you. A few years ago, when Tangent came out with their 4,000 cubic foot Pullman standard hopper cars, the 3-bay ones, I did a review on the BN ones, and Burlington Northern had like 400 or 500 of the Pullman standard cars with the single rotary end. And of course, Tony, being Tony, thought, well, Ryan can handle this. He sends me another one for review at the same time of a double rotary. So now we get to talk about the single rotary and the double rotary. So, it's the same idea, but different details.
You mentioned one thing that, you mentioned number boards being one thing on locomotives. For me, it's fonts. Like matching the font is so important. Getting that font right. Like you can't just pick one that's close, even like, you can't go into Photoshop and just pick any sans serif for serif font and think it's okay. I am dead stickler to seeing the correct font.
That is exactly why, instead of using commercially made decals to do a lot of my C&IM models, I'm not kidding you, when they repainted some of their switch engines in the 1980s, the C&IM has a very unique ampersand, and the factory ampersand was very clean. When they were repainted, they looked like fat snowmen with like a C connected to it. And I kept looking at that and I'm like, how can I get that to look right? Well, I found a guy that does custom decal work. I got him some pictures and some, dimensions, and now I have them on my switch engines and they look exactly the way they should. They almost look goofy.
Yeah. But it's accurate. Yeah. And there's so many, and you hate to be that much of a stickler. I wrote my review and I noticed the font wasn't right. Like you could just see it was like a tail of an R or something was just not quite the right font. And it was close. It's in the neighborhood. It's certainly within the ballpark and maybe within the field, but it's just not quite a match. And those are things, for at least for me, and maybe I'm just me, but they stick out like a sore thumb when I see a mismatched font.
Right. And getting back to freight cars, you were asking me about details and that sort of thing. Again, the freight cars now, good Lord. I mean, we're talking air hoses and, truck or body mounted brakes, and, some of the manufacturers are doing the right roller bearing covers and metal wheels. And I mean, it's just, it's incredible what we see now. I just, and for doing a freight car review, those are actually tougher for me because I'm not I'm more well versed in locomotives than I am freight cars. That doesn't mean I don't know anything about freight cars, but like if you threw a Gunderson boxcar at me tomorrow, oh my God, I'd have to probably just do 3 hours of research to understand cubic footage, how many ribs, what kind of door it's got. I can't just look at a Gunderson boxcar and know that.
Speaking of what you were just mentioning, all these details, and you mentioned about the locomotives, and now we talked a little bit about the rolling stock. I ask you a question. What do you think the next big improvement in manufacturing in general is going to be or should be?
Boy, man. I mean, I was going to say air hoses that connected between freight cars, but we kind of already had that. I mean, I don't know. And the reason I'm saying I don't know is because I could sit here and tell you that, oh, I've got these DCC decoders in my locomotives, but the independent brake makes a sound, and the air bleed off makes a sound, and the air compressor makes a. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, unless it's like 3D printers that you can buy for $10.99 or something. I don't know, because there is one thing I think we will see before we come to think of it. I'm glad you asked me this question, because I model 1989. The CNIM actually went to rear end devices a couple of years before. Not all the time, but sometimes went to a rear end device. We're going to see operable rear end devices that are not connected to a battery source. I know it's going to happen, and I don't know how, but somebody out there is going to figure it out. Yeah. And an HO scale Freddy's not very big. You know that.
That will definitely be an amazing creation for sure.
Yep.
And it really is hard. I mean, I asked the question, but even I think about how I would answer it, and it's tough, because it just seems like everything we start to imagine they're doing. Like, hey, I'd like to have a throttle that really looks like a switch stand. Oh, they make it. We've had defect detectors. Now ISC's coming out with an even, a newer defect detector you can add to your layout. You've got signal detection. You've got activated crossing gates. Maybe the next one will be the Don Iris invention of putting the lights on top of the gates like he's done by hand. Maybe that somebody will manufacture that, but it's just so hard because they've come so far, and as things tighten, they can just do more and more stuff where our imagination can't almost keep up.
My friend Isaac Fabris, who we're, acquainted, Isaac, because you've had him on the show.
Yeah, we've had him on the show for sure. Yep.
I was up at his house one night. He lives about an hour north of me, and we were running his layout. He's got a really small shelf layout. It's really cool. And he goes, "Oh yeah, you got to check out these flange squealers, man. You got to check out these flange squealers." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Oh no, check this out." And I kind of knew about him, but never seen him work. So he put him on this industry track where there's like a sharp curve going into like a lumber yard distribution center. Sure enough, I'm backing the engine in there with the carload of lumber, and I mean the flanges are squealing, and it's like, wow. This is just incredible. It's awesome.
The theater of layout has just become this entire thing. Sound elements and, the visuals and all of that. It's just become this really dynamic thing.
Yeah, it's really, for what I've seen in my lifetime already is just incredible. And I can just imagine the next 10 years, I'm telling you, there's going to be a working Freddy. And they're going to be in all shapes and sizes, and it's not going to be operated with a battery and a wire in the boxcar. It's going to be something you hang on the coupler, and it's going to work, and it's going to be awesome.
I guess the only other one I would answer to maybe improve is handrails. And you mentioned looking at hand railings, but I just hope that at some point somebody comes up with a little bit stiffer handrail, and maybe even some aftermarket replacement handrails for some of the locomotives that didn't quite have a good stiff handrail on it, other than having to handcraft it. Something that says, okay, I can type in, all right, I need one for, a B40-8. All right, I need, here's the hand railing kit for it. And they're nice and stiff, and, put them on the locomotive, paint them, and they're ready to go. That would be my wish list, I guess.
Ray Rapido kind of had the beat on that when they did their hybrid handrail. They started I believe it's brass wire for the railing and plastic stanchions.
Yeah.
But I can see in our near future where somebody may just start coming out with metal ones that fit, a proto switch engine or a Athearn Blue Box SD4. You know what I'm saying? Just all kinds of different ones.
Yeah, because a crooked handrail just takes away from the look of a locomotive so much when you look down or you see it and the handrail's all waved out. That'd be nice to be able to have an aftermarket option to put a nice straight hand railing on a locomotive.
Right. That is a good point. And like I said, Rapido has them on there. I think the B36-7s might have been the first HO scale diesels that they started those on, but those are money. Those are solid, literally and figuratively.
So through all of this background prototype research, seeing these stuff put in your hands, the locomotives and rolling stock that have gone across your review table, what would you say is the thing that you've learned the most in that process?
That the tooling of these models is absolutely incredible. I mean, what I'm looking at is scale 1/87th versions of the real thing. And I mean, that is across the board. It's impressive. Again, I can't build a locomotive out of parts. You know what I'm saying? These are just, it's incredible what you see. Yeah. The tooling is just crazy. And the mechanisms have gotten really good too. Those just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, it's quite amazing the stuff that that can be done in the manufacturing process. Sometimes, being able to try to recreate a factory environment on your table is just near impossible. And it just drives home the point in my belief that we are in the golden era of model railroading. The things that we have available to us, the things that you and I mentioned just moments ago, and they just keep tapping into imaginations and letting them run wild and producing just amazing stuff. It's really hard to complain about what's coming out. And we talked about it earlier, the difference between price and value. And, you kind of hinted at that. And I think that's a great point to drive home once again.
Yeah. You have to understand that, for me to go into my hobby shop and pay, say, $200 for a SW1200 switch engine with every detail imaginable. And then sometimes what's even more crazy is if you buy an undecorated locomotive nowadays, you get 2 or 3 choices of truck side frames. You get 2 or 3 choices of cabs. You get diesels to do it this way or diesels to do it that way. It's just, it's, golden age is a good way to put it. But I really think, Ray, it's going to keep getting better.
Oh yeah. I think it is. And again, as manufacturing gets tighter and tighter, and then the capabilities of it, where they're able to, and we saw in that video I mentioned from TSG Multimedia where they're printing, and Rapido did the same thing, and Tony mentioned it on the last What's Happening in Model Railroading. Printing out in 3D to check it. They don't have to wait for it to come back from China to check it. They're checking it right there using the same drawings, but putting it in a 3D printer. Check it out there just to, and that helps them verify accuracy even before that process has even started. So just the advancements are going to just benefit us so much in the hobby. And we're going to get spoiled with some really nice stuff. We're going to have to pay for it, but we're going to also have to understand the value of it. In turn, we're getting stuff that's so much better than 20 or 30 years ago.
Right. Exactly. Going back to your point just a minute ago about the golden age of model trains, or because it's not just HO scale, it's everything. I asked Tony Cook one time, my editor for Model Railroad News. I said, Tony, there's so much stuff coming out. How do you keep track of it? He says, well, I can't. He goes, no one can. And he said, I'll be honest with you. I could print Model Railroad News could be 225 pages every month. And I'm like, geez, it's like a catalog. That's crazy.
Yeah, just like we say, same thing kind of conversation with Tony. We talk about we could probably do What's Happening in Model Railroading every week. There's enough releases. It's hard to pick down, boil it down to a month. And, we go through, maybe 10 or so releases. And that's just a little bit of what's going on, let alone what he gets in the magazine and what you folks are reviewing. And then about the time that hits, there's another magazine's worth. It's crazy. It's just amazing, crazy in a great way. Absolutely amazing that our hobby is just continuing to evolve in the way it's evolving.
And I kind of consider myself an insider, and I'm sure other people would, just because of my, because I write reviews on a lot of different stuff for model trains, model railroading. And it's like you were just talking about 10 different new announcements. I'll bet I only know about 3 or 5 of them. That's what's crazy.
And now it's time to hear from some folks on the question of the month of what they're looking for. And the question was, what is the number one factor you consider when purchasing a locomotive? Is it price? Is it specific details, lighting, or something else? And we've got 8 great responses, so we're going to take a listen to those. Here we go.
Good afternoon, Ray. My name is Bob Petita. I'm from Central Indiana. What I look for in a locomotive that I'm going to purchase is, number one, is it a quality locomotive? Number 2, is it DCC ready, or does it have a Log Sound 5 decoder in it? Thirdly, does it fit the era and timeline of either A, my layout, or B, the interests that I have? Enjoy the podcast always. Have a good day.
So some pretty common criteria there.
Definitely. People are looking for, he said, quality locomotive. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think that's important. I can model and doctor up anything. And if it runs good, it's work. You know what I'm saying? That's what makes it fun. Nobody wants to put a locomotive on your track and then it doesn't run right, So yeah, that's important.
And this is kind of one of my pet peeves that I'll air for a second. When you see folks that are starting out in the hobby, you got to start out with something at least mid-range. Don't buy something that's old and tired, and that's only going to get you frustrated and make you want to walk away. So take a little bit, get a halfway decent locomotive, and be able to enjoy it, because otherwise you're just going to, and again, you'll hit that frustration, you'll throw it aside, and you'll move on to something else.
Exactly.
All right, let's listen to our next response.
Hey all, my name is Dennis, or N-Scale Train Boy. I'm from Wappingers Falls, New York. And when I'm thinking about purchasing a locomotive, the things I consider is, for the most part, a balance between price and era. I model 1975 to 1985, so if it came after that, it's automatically out. If it came before that, then it's a little more of a consideration, but that's where the price comes in as well, because just out of college, so I don't have nearly as much money as I would like to spend on trains available to me. So yeah, about a 50-50 mix between the price and the era.
Well, one thing we can say about price, and we kind of just mentioned that you don't have to always buy the top level locomotive. There are some good mid-range locomotives available at reasonable prices.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. And if you don't mind me saying, Scale Trains kind of covered that with the Rivet Counter series and then the Operator series. And I've reviewed both. Yeah. Hey, same locomotive. It's just the Rivet Counter is going to have more details, but it's going to cost you a little more.
Yeah. And then there's other manufacturers as well that have that. And you can work your way up. It doesn't have to be the top level right away. You can work your way up. Start with some operator level stuff, or some maybe Athearn Ready to Run or that level, and then you can work yourself up to that higher tier.
Right. I mean, Atlas Trainman would be, if my grandkid got interested tomorrow in it, I would buy him an Atlas Trainman Jeep 4039 and say, hey buddy, here you go. We're going to run this for a while. And it's not the most detailed thing in the world, but sure, it's quality. It's going to run good.
Absolutely. All right, let's hear from Jeff Schultz.
Hi, I'm Jeff Schultz from Staten, Oregon, and my primary consideration when selecting locomotives is appropriateness. While I'm freelancing pretty close to a prototype. So I'm looking for locomotives that would not be out of place on the prototype that I'm more or less following. So we're talking second generation 645 powered SDs and GPs. And a secondary consideration, quite honestly, is the paint scheme, because I model a Genesee and Wyoming freelance. So if I can get a Genesee and Wyoming painted locomotive, then I'm already 90% of the way there.
Oh boy, I just heard Don Iris cringe about Genesee and Wyoming and his detested candy corn, but that's what Jeff is modeling, and he's looking for Genesee and Wyoming orange.
That was an interesting point. His first point was he wanted appropriateness, and this is like so perfect. I just did a review on a Walthers Proto GM&O GP30. One of the details incorporated into this run of that GP30 was the newer style plastic number boards. The units originally came with glass number boards, black with like the clear white numbers. And then later on they got dirty and you couldn't see them, so they went to a white plastic insert with black numbers. And I did notate that in the review. I thought it was interesting. But yeah, there's probably a few GM&O fans out there that were thinking, oh no, it's supposed to have black number boards with white, numbers, so appropriateness. Yeah, that's something I never really keyed on before, but yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. Let's hear from Keith Terrell.
My name is Keith Terrell, and I'm from Jamestown, New York, and I select locomotives based on, of course, scale, but road name and price, and whether or not it's DCC. Thank you.
Yeah, so DCC, I mean, I guess that's just the wave of the world. And, I know there's some stuff that's DCC ready and a lot of guys DC, but it just seems like almost a requirement now.
It's getting to the point where, because a lot of these locomotives, obviously reviewing locomotives with a lot of, Tsunami 2s and these Lokesound V5 decoders, I mean, how can you not fall in love with them? They're awesome. They sound like the real thing. It's incredible. My own dad loved the fact that I was reviewing an IT switch engine that had a Lokesound V5, 12-cylinder 567. He says, oh, yeah, that sounds exactly right. Well, he was right. It does.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's not just generic anymore. It is, we talk about details. You talk about details on the locomotive. How about details in the decoders? I mean, just the exact sounds, exact bells, just everything. I mean, again, going back to our original thought, I mean, everything the imagination can come up with, they're doing it. It's amazing.
Ray, we don't have diesel smoke and we don't have operable air brakes. And that's, what don't we have?
It's amazing. All right, time to head down under with Marty Jenkins.
Okay, it's Marty here from Australia, and I reckon the question of the month is, the factor that I consider when purchasing a locomotive is how many can I fit on my layout?
Well, Marty, you just made it easy. I guess everything's within your wheelhouse. So long as it fits on that in the Marty's train shed, I guess it's up for grabs.
And that happens because, like I said, I had to reel myself in or I'd have one of everything.
All right. Speaking of overseas, let's hop over to Switzerland.
Hi, Ray. My name is Robin, and I am from Switzerland. So for me, the number one factor I consider before I purchase a locomotive is it available in brass or not? So due to the fact that I only have a small switching layout, I don't need a huge number of locomotives. And if I buy one, then I try to get it from Overland or from Division Point. I model the era 2008 to 2018, and I usually try to find a locomotive from Overland models before I buy one. Thank you, and keep on the great show.
Now, brass, that's its own animal, isn't it?
I was not even expecting an answer like that tonight. That's interesting. I mean, I only know brass as collectors, really, I guess. Wow. That kind of takes me by surprise.
So this is what makes Robin very unique and a guy that I've got to get on the show and talk to. So he's in Switzerland. He's modeling American railroads. He models the Norfolk Southern, and he's doing it all in brass. Quite amazing. We got to get him on here. We got to talk to Robin. We got to find out what's going on over there. I'm sure it's going to be wildly interesting. All right, let's take a listen to Samuel Dickinson.
Hi, Ray. This is Samuel Dickinson from Evansville, Indiana. I model an alternate history version of the Grand Trunk Western that was successful in its attempts to acquire the Milwaukee Road back in the 1980s. To do this, I make sure I only purchase locomotives that match what I model. So obviously, Grand Trunk Western and Milwaukee Road engines, and I also acquire Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton engines, which were acquired by the GTW a few years prior, run-through engines from parent railroad Canadian National, and paint schemes of railroads that sold locomotives secondhand to the Grand Trunk Western. So the Rock Island Bankruptcy Blue and the Missouri Pacific's Blue. I also make sure that I buy locomotives that match the time frame that I'm running. So no modern locomotives, no wide cabs, no modern paint schemes. And I also make sure I don't buy engines that are too old, have outdated paint schemes, or were retired by this time. Hope this answers your question. I look forward to hearing the answers from other listeners, and I hope you all have a great day.
Well, that kind of brings up the point that was made back on the show with Tim Garland and Don Iris on the Talking Ops with Don Iris show about making sure, and even with Samuel's, I guess, alternate universe approach to freelance, still making sure that you have locomotives that fall perfectly within the era that you're creating and nothing that's out of bounds.
Exactly. And I think right now in our golden era of model trains right now, I mean, it's, if you want a new GE, you can go here. If you want, second generation Jeeps, you go here. If you want the old SD40-2s, you go here. It's getting to the point where a lot of those weird gaps are starting to be filled in, and nobody will be able to complain about not having what they want.
We can't get there fast enough. That's for sure. Where we can all stop complaining.
Yeah, well, my problem, Ray, is I'm going to be able to complain longer than anyone because I'm still waiting for a plastic RS 1325, which I know will never be built. So we'll just move on.
And last but not least, let's hear from Tom here.
I'm Tom Klimzak from Lamont, Illinois, and we've been reviewing the top 10 reasons why locomotives are purchased for the Blue Island and Western Railway. Number 1 on our list this week is relevance. Does the locomotive fit the time and place modeled? Have a great day.
I think Tom is tapping into his internal Casey Kasem there with a countdown and quite creative response from Tom. But yeah, so another good one about, making sure that you're matching what you're modeling.
Yeah, I think we saw kind of in the late 90s there, it seemed like every manufacturer was doing F units. You probably, you were around then, and that kind of came into the early 2000s to the mid 2000s. And I always said to my friend, I'm like, I'm so sick of F units. Why is they're all making F units? And, he's like, Ryan, the guys that are older than you, they want F units because that's what they model. And that made complete sense. Yeah. Now when I look at it in a bigger picture and I'm more, mature now and understand, totally makes sense.
That's what they can relate to as well. Like what we relate to, what we saw and what we're seeing, what they saw in their more formidable years and what they remember is F units. For us, it's, maybe early EMDs or even up to younger guys with being fascinated with GEVOs or whatever else, SD70 Max or whatever else that, is what they see is what they're influenced and likely what they're going to model.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, I want to thank everybody who submitted their answer to the question of the month. We'll have a new question of the month up here soon. You can find that at aroundthelayout.com/question. We'll also be putting the links up for today's show and the things that we had talked about with Ryan Crawford on our website, aroundthelayout.com/show. /123. Ryan, want to thank you again for coming on Around the Layout, telling us a bit about the art of the review and the things that you look into when you do a review. Learned quite a bit tonight and appreciate you coming by and talking to us about it.
I really appreciate you having me on, Ray. And I have so many other topics I'd love to talk to you about that involve model railroading. So anytime.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.